is that kind of, there was no way Marlon was going to come back and do the movie. In the meantime, we had been talking to Hugh, who I had known before, and I thought he could do an incredible job, and I think he did an incredible job. And as much as it would have been unbelievable to have Marlon Brando in that role, I think Hugh did an exceptional job. So,
what was it like shooting in those tunnels? My God, I mean that really adds so much to the movie. The atmosphere of the film is those tunnels.
well, Norman Rossington said it for me in the scene there where he says, "God, does it stink down here?" The smell down there was unbelievable. I mean, those tunnels, these were real abandoned tunnels that we were shooting in. And those tunnels had been abandoned since the late 1800s. And they had been used for air raid shelters during World War II. They opened them up, but that was the only use. And since the end of the war, between the end of the war and 1972, when we were shooting this film, the only people that were down there were, it became a place for homeless people. And there were lots and lots of people who were living in those tunnels. When we went in there to look at them, and we met the people who lived there, and they showed us around. And when we decided we were going to shoot there, we found shelters for everybody and moved everybody out. And actually hired a bunch of them to help clean the place up. And we were spraying that place with disinfectant. The smell down there was unbelievable. And we didn't have to go too far to find the rats. They were there. And we brought in some trained rats that we worked with, but
those rats were trained? How do you train a rat?
We called a rat trainer. And they had trained rats, and like the ones up, like in the beginning of the tracking shot, the rat that runs across, those are her name was Nicola. And she spent most of the time when she wasn't on set shooting in my parka. And she just used to stick her head out.
Yeah, I mean, it's, anybody have any questions? Toss them out. Yeah, in the back.
How was it working with Christopher Lee?
Oh, it was fabulous.
Working with Christopher Lee.
Working with Christopher Lee is just, was an amazing pleasure. The whole cast was incredible. And when Carrie Jones and I wrote the script, we wrote it with Donald Pleasance in mind. We had heard that Donald kept talking about he wanted to do a comedy. So we thought if we only gave him his part of the script, he'd think it was a comedy. And everybody thought, yeah, right, Donald Pleasance. At that time, Donald Pleasance was the actor's actor. He was considered to be the greatest actor in England at the time. And he was actually in New York doing Man in the Glass Booth, which he won a Tony for. And this is a guy who was doing Harold Pinter plays and films, and working with Polanski, and the chances of getting him we thought were slim to none, but we went after it. And with Jay Cantor as the executive producer, any agent took it quite seriously on a submission. So Jay gave the script to Donald's agent and said, we've heard Donald want to do a comedy. Well, this isn't a comedy, but his part is definitely comedy. And would he consider it? And they sent the script to Donald. Donald read the script and said that he'd meet with me. I flew to New York and met with Donald. And Donald basically smiled at me and said, I always wanted to do a comedy. I'll just forget about the other half of the script. and he said he'd do it. Once we had Donald Pleasance, everyone else called us, including Christopher Lee. Christopher talked to Paul Maslansky, who was a producer, and they were friends. They'd done quite a number of pictures together before this. And Christopher said, "Where's my part?" And Paul said to Chris, "Well, you know, your salary is twice the budget we have on this movie." And Chris said, "No, I'm not worried about the money. If I can do a scene one-on-one with Donald Pleasance and not have to wear fangs, I'll do it for scale." And so Paul called me and said, "Write a scene." And I did, and Chris said, "This is great." And, you know, Donald was as excited about working with Chris as Chris was working with Donald. And it was an amazing day for me. I'm this 20-something film director, you know, doing my first picture, and I walk on a set, and there's Donald Pleasance and Christopher Lee and Norman Rossington. Between the three of them, even at that time, in about we just figured it out the other day, between the three of them, at that point, they had been in 400 movies. By the end of their lives, it was over 600, close to 700 films that the three of them had done. And there I was, this snot-nosed kid, and trying to make a movie, and have these three people on the set in front of me. But they were such gentlemen and such pros. It was unbelievable.
Yes.
Mitch mentioned a different cut called Raw Meat, which I've not seen. What is the main difference between that and what we saw tonight, and why was there a different cut?
Well, fortunately, you'll never get to see raw meat. It was never scanned. The prints are all gone. When we finished the film, we had done the film for Rank Box in the UK. And we hadn't sold the rest of the world. So after the film was finished, we had to sell, you know, the rest of the world for distribution. Frank Yablans, who was president of Paramount Pictures at the time, came to London to see the movie. And he saw it, and he just flipped out over it and said, "I want to buy this movie for the rest of the world." So Jay gets on the phone to the people who had financed the movie, and they were in New York, and he says, "I got great news. Paramount wants to buy the picture for the whole world." And they said, "Well, it's too late." And Jay said, "What do you mean it's too late?" He said, "We sold the U.S.-Canada rights to AIP, which was Samuel Z. Arkoff, at which point Jay and Laddie and Paul and I took out razors and started to cut away at our wrists because we were really upset. I mean, AIP was totally an exploitation company that gave no respect to the films that they bought or made. And so anyways, Sam Arkoff looked at the movie and he said, "Well, yeah, we bought this picture and blah, 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 but I think that basically it's way too intelligent for the great unwashed, you," that's what he called you. And, you know, like that tracking shot, nobody's going to sit through that shot. And who can understand what Donald Pleasance says? You know, he's too British. It's all too British. So they redubbed most of Donald's dialogue. They redubbed a lot of, actually, the British dialogue. They cut out the tracking shot.
Which set up the whole layer.
Yeah, which it sets up the movie. I mean, that was the whole idea.
Already you mentioned like the two best things about the movie, those amazing tracking shots at Donald Pleasance.
Yeah, right. And they just made this mess of the movie. Robin Wood, who at the time was probably the premier film critic in the English-speaking world, wrote an article. Well, he reviewed the film for the London Times, which was a mind-boggling, at least for me, a mind-boggling review. And then he wrote an article for the Village Voice, which he called Butchered. And Butchered was turning Deathline into raw meat. And he basically said in that article, "Don't go see raw meat." wait till you can see Deathline. And here we are 45 years later in the United States and Canada is our first opportunity to see Deathline.
Actually, MGM released a DVD about 6 or 7 years ago, which was, it says raw meat on it, but what they actually scanned was the negative, the old negative that had originally been delivered. It was a real,
It was a reversal into
yeah, it was a,
positive.
yeah, it was a dupe negative.
Fourth generation.
And so the movie, you could barely see it on the DVD. So it's actually it was the integral version, but you just couldn't see it. So
Yeah,
now,
I mean, like, in the tracking shot, it'd be black for
you
10
see little
seconds.
specks of light here and there, but you really couldn't see what was going on. So what you saw this evening is the way it was intended to be seen.
So, it was very frustrating for us because the rights went from AIP, and when AIP closed, it went into something and ended up at MGM. And MGM was not interested in restoring the picture or anything. They just wanted to release it because around the millennium, Guillermo del Toro wrote an article in 1995 for Sight and Sound, the magazine from the British Film Institute, in which he credited Deathline as being the reason he became a film director. He just said he was so moved when he saw this film that that's what he wanted to do. And so suddenly there was this whole awareness of Deathline that had been lost, at least in the United States. In Europe, it's played almost constantly since it was first made, but nobody had seen it over here. So that happened, and then some other things happened, and then the Film Society of Lincoln Center, during the New York Film Festival in 2002, honored Deathline, and Guillermo was the master of ceremony, and it was, and I own the original answer print. It was a 3-stripe Technicolor answer print, and the color is as perfect now as it was then, because it's dye transfer and they don't fade. So we brought that print to New York and showed it at Lincoln Center. I couldn't believe this film, which maybe would have played 42nd Street, Sleaze Houses, was now playing at Lincoln Center. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times about that. And Guillermo introduced it, and we showed it, and suddenly people wanted to see Deathline again, which is, and see it here. So, but we couldn't get the rights, and MGM had it, and MGM put out that awful DVD. And finally, about a year and a half ago, MGM's ownership lapsed, and we grabbed it, and I got it to Bill. And Bill said, let's restore it. And with the help of the BFI, the British Film Institute, we found the original camera negative. And what you just saw here tonight is a scan from the original camera negative, not any of the printing elements, the original negative that actually ran through the camera on the set. And from that original negative, Bill spent a lot of money, and nobody gives the care to restoration that Blue Underground does. I mean, it's an ad. But I mean, I'm so appreciative of what they've done. And I mean, last Friday night we had Paul Maslansky and Jay Cantor, and they just got up and applauded Bill for what he's done with our film, and it was fantastic.
Thank you, Gary, but you made the movie. Yes, in the back.
And what's the politic message in this movie?
It's about society's uncaringness for the underclasses. I mean, the fact that it was working class people who were trapped down in those tunnels and nobody went in to save them, and yet they survived, and generation after generation they've been down there. And so, over the years, lots of people disappeared off of those tube platforms. But who rides the tube at midnight? Working class people. So the police never really spent the time to even try and find Yurtsy Panofsky, as an example. And until James Manford, OBE, disappeared, nobody ever investigated. So it's my inspiration to do that is I moved to London after the convention in Chicago in '68. I just couldn't stay there anymore, and we had the convention and what happened at the Chicago convention in '68, and then Nixon gets elected, and I just said, I don't want to be here. This isn't a country I want to live in. And I went to England. And I get to England, and everybody's talking to me about how racist we are in America, which is true. But they're just pointing a finger and pointing a finger and pointing a finger. And I'm looking at society in England and saying, wait a minute, with all this classism we've got here, you are more racist and classist than we are in the United States. And I just wanted to make a statement about that. And I had written a couple of very politically blatant political scripts, and nobody wanted to make them because they were like student films, so when I had the opportunity and everybody said to me, write a horror film to get that made, I thought, how about hiding a political message inside a horror film? And I did, and nobody at the beginning realized what that it was there, and we got the film made, and critics like Robin Wood saw it right off the bat, and that's really what led to Deathline's popularity in Europe.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask if you ever got to talk to Robin Wood or Toby Hooper about the sort of political and thematic similarities between your movie and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre a couple years later in America, and how they both dealt with the marginalization of the underclass or the exploitation of the underclass.
Well, I mean, I've talked to lots of people about it, and Robin Wood and I became quite good friends, and we had a long-standing dialogue and talked a lot. You know what? A lot of horror films have political message. It's like, Get Out last year, everybody talks about, how that had such a strong political message in it. And it did, it told the black story, and it talked about racism. But it's been happening for years. George, may he rest in peace. Boy, did we lose a legend last weekend, and a friend. Every one of George's films had a political or social message in it. It was very important to him to put those messages in. And I mean, we've been doing, listen, when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, she had a political message in it. When Bram Stoker wrote Dracula originally, there was social messages in it. And it's been going on forever, and it works. This is a great medium to put social messaging in, because you don't have to beat people over the head. You don't have to preach to the converted. You can just put the message in there. If people want to accept the message, if people want to feel the message, they can, and if they just want to watch blood, they can do that. So.
Yes. Anybody else? Oh.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you were watching exciting to you that you're seeing you play it?
You know, I enjoyed the Hammer films and the Amicus and Butchers and, you know, all of those pictures. But I don't know if they were inspiration to me. I think my inspiration came from other places. I was always a Hitchcock fan. And I was a big Roman Polanski fan. I mean, I just loved all of Roman's early films, and then, you know, the icing on the cake was Rosemary's Baby, which I think is, you know, it's a film that you could go home tonight and throw a Blu-ray or DVD in your player and sit down and you think you're watching a brand new movie. His films are ageless, and I like the old. You know, I grew up on the early Draculas and the early Wolfman movies and the Mummy and, you know, the Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi films. I think those are much more inspirational to me. And Vincent Price. House of Wax was the film that, if I was to write the article that Guillermo wrote about Deathline, I would write about House of Wax, because I was about 6 years old when I saw it in 3D. My brother, who was 6 years older than me, took me to see House of Wax, and that 3D and it coming right at you was traumatized me and turned me into a horror director.
Anybody else have a question? No? 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 I guess that's it, Gary.
Okay.